The rain drummed against the windows of Marcus Wellington's penthouse office like an angry symphony, each droplet catching the neon lights of the city below and fracturing them into 1,000 tiny rainbows. From his chair behind the mahogany desk that cost more than most people's cars, Marcus watched the world blur and distort through the glass, much like his own reflection had become distorted over the years. At 45, he was everything society told him he should be. Wealthy, beyond measure, powerful beyond question, married to a woman who looked perfect on his arm and in photographs, but as he stared out at the storm, something cold and hollow echoed in his chest, a feeling he had learned to silence with work, with acquisitions, with the constant pursuit of more. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration. The Hartwell Industries merger, 18 months in the making, had finally been approved. By tomorrow morning, Marcus would be $30 million. Richer, and 350 employees would be out of work. The factories would close, the operations would be moved overseas, and the small town of Millbrook would lose its largest employer. "Darling, are you ready?" Victoria's voice cut through his contemplation like crystal against steel. She stood in the doorway of his office, a vision in designer elegance that had graced the covers of 3 society magazines in the past year. At 28, Victoria Ashworth Wellington was everything a successful man's wife should be: beautiful, socially connected, and ambitious in all the right ways. Her blonde hair was swept into a perfect chignon. Her dress was a shade of midnight blue that matched her sapphire necklace, and her smile was as practiced and polished as everything else about her. "The reservation at Le Bernardin is in 20 minutes, she continued, adjusting her diamond bracelet with the kind of casual gesture that screamed expense. "I've already called ahead to make sure they have our usual table, table 12 with the city view. I told them we're celebrating something very special tonight." Marcus stood slowly, his movements carrying the weight of decisions he had learned not to question. The merger was indeed something to celebrate, at least by the standards that had governed his life for the past decade. More money meant more power. More power meant more respect. And more respect meant he could finally stop proving himself to a world that had once dismissed him as just another kid from the wrong side of town, with big dreams and no connections. "Yes, I'm ready," he said, though the words felt strange in his mouth. When had he stopped being excited about success? When had victories started feeling like defeats? Victoria moved to his side, her heels clicking against the marble floor with military precision. She was beautiful, undeniably so, but her beauty felt cold and untouchable, like an expensive sculpture you could admire but never truly connect with. Their marriage, 6 months old and already featured in Town & Country's Weddings of the Year issue, was built on a foundation of mutual benefit rather than mutual affection. Victoria got the lifestyle she had always wanted: unlimited shopping, charity galas where she could be photographed looking philanthropic, and the social status that came with being Mrs. Marcus Wellington. Marcus got arm candy and a wife who understood that their relationship was a business arrangement wrapped in wedding silk. "I hope the service is better than last time," Victoria said as they walked toward the elevator, her voice carrying the particular brand of entitlement that came from never having to work for anything. "I simply cannot tolerate incompetence, especially when we're paying those prices." The server was so slow, and she had the audacity to seem annoyed when I sent my entree back twice. Marcus nodded, absently, his mind already shifting to tomorrow's meetings, to the phone calls he would have to make to inform the Hartwell employees that their jobs were disappearing, to the press conference where he would spin the closure as strategic restructuring and market optimization. He had become very good at using clean corporate language to describe messy human consequences. The elevator descended through 43 floors of steel and glass, carrying them from the rarefied air of executive suites down to the street level where their driver waited with the Bentley. Marcus watched the numbers tick down and felt an odd sense of vertigo, as if he were falling faster than the elevator itself. 23 floors below, in a tiny studio apartment that cost less per month than Marcus spent on wine, Sarah Chen sat on the edge of her futon, pulling on the black non-slip shoes that had become as familiar as an old friend over the past 6 months. Her feet, swollen from pregnancy and 8-hour shifts spent standing, protested as she forced them into the worn leather. At 26, she should have been preparing for maternity leave from a marketing job that offered benefits and paid sick time. Instead, she was getting ready for another night of serving people who looked through her as if she were invisible furniture. The baby kicked, hard enough to make Sarah gasp and place both hands on her belly. 7 months along, and still every movement felt like a miracle and a reminder of everything she was facing alone. She had felt the first flutter of life during her 3rd month, sitting in the unemployment office after being laid off from her marketing position. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had been fired for taking too much time off for morning sickness, and the man responsible for her condition had been nowhere to be found. "Easy there, little one," she whispered, stroking her belly through the black maternity uniform she had, bought second-hand from another pregnant server. "Mama's got to work tonight. We need every tip we can get." The studio apartment told the story of a life that had been carefully planned and then completely derailed. In one corner sat a crib still in its box, purchased with 3 weeks' worth of tips and still waiting to be assembled because Sarah didn't own the right tools and couldn't afford to hire someone. A small pile of baby clothes, mostly gifts from her co-workers at Lou. Bernadine sat folded on top of a dresser she had found on the sidewalk and refinished herself. Books about pregnancy and childbirth, checked out from the library because she couldn't afford to buy them, were stacked next to a notebook where she kept track of every penny she earned and spent. The refrigerator held the contents of careful grocery shopping: peanut butter, bread, milk, eggs, and whatever vegetables were on sale that week. The freezer contained exactly 1 pint of chocolate ice cream, her only indulgence, saved for the nights when the loneliness felt too heavy to bear, and she needed something sweet to remind her that life could still offer small pleasures. Sarah stood slowly, her hand moving to the small of her back where a persistent ache had taken up residence. The pregnancy book said back pain was normal, especially when you spent most of your day on your feet, but knowing it was normal didn't make it hurt less. She caught her reflection in the mirror that hung next to her front door, the same mirror where she had once practiced presentations for marketing meetings, where she had gotten ready for dates with Marcus, where she had first noticed the glow that everyone said pregnant women were supposed to have. The woman looking back at her was different from the confident marketing executive she had once been. This woman looked tired, older than her 26 years, but there was also something new in her eyes, a strength that came from surviving things she had never imagined she would have to face. This woman had learned to smile at customers who treated her like dirt, to gracefully accept charity from co-workers, to find joy in a baby's kick even when the future felt uncertain and frightening. The bus ride to Le Bernardin took 45 minutes, winding through neighborhoods that grew progressively more expensive as they approached the restaurant district. Sarah watched through the rain-streaked window as modest apartment buildings gave way to elegant townhouses, as corner bodegas were replaced by boutiques where a single handbag cost more than Sarah made in a month. This was the world she had once moved through easily, back when she had a good job and a man who loved her and plans that seemed solid and achievable. Now she was just passing through, a visitor in a world that no longer had a place for her. The other passengers on the bus were mostly service workers like herself, housekeepers heading to clean the homes of the wealthy, security guards starting their night shifts, restaurant staff preparing for another evening of catering to people who had never learned to see them as fully human. They nodded to each other in the universal acknowledgement of shared struggle, the quiet solidarity of people who understood what it meant to work hard for very little and to do it with a smile. Sarah closed her eyes and tried to rest for the remaining 20 minutes of the journey. The baby had been unusually active today, as if sensing her mother's anxiety about work, about money, about the thousand small worries that came with facing single motherhood in a city that showed no mercy to the struggling. She had felt contractions twice this week. Braxton Hicks, the doctor had assured her, just practiced contractions that were normal but needed to be monitored. The doctor had also mentioned that stress could trigger real labor, which was just one more thing for Sarah to worry about. The irony was that she was working at the very restaurant where Marcus had proposed to her almost exactly 2 years ago. Table 12, with the view of the city lights, champagne that cost more than her weekly rent, and promises about a future that had seemed as solid as the diamond ring he had slipped onto her finger. She still had the ring hidden in a jewelry box in her apartment because she couldn't bring herself to sell it, even though the money would have solved a lot of her current problems. That proposal seemed like a lifetime ago, back when Marcus was still building his business and needed her marketing expertise, when he still looked at her like she was the most important person in his world, when their love felt like something that could survive anything. She had believed in him completely, had worked late nights helping him prepare presentations, had celebrated his first major contracts as if they were her own victories, had seen potential in him that even he hadn't always seen in himself. The change had been gradual at first. Success had started to change Marcus in small ways, the way he spoke to waiters, the way he measured friendships by their potential business value, the way he started attending social events where Sarah felt out of place and underdressed. Then came the bigger changes. The move to the penthouse, the new circle of wealthy friends, the increasing importance of appearances and social status. Sarah had tried to keep up, had bought clothes she couldn't afford, and learned to make small talk about charity galas and country club memberships, but she always felt like she was playing a role that didn't quite fit. Marcus had seemed increasingly embarrassed by her middle-class background, her thrift store finds, her preference for quiet nights at home over elaborate social events. The final blow had come when Victoria Ashworth entered their social circle, beautiful, connected, and everything that Sarah was not. The breakup had been clinical, efficient, and devastating. Marcus had explained that they wanted different things and were growing in different directions. He had been kind but distant, treating their relationship like a business partnership that was no longer profitable. Sarah had tried to tell him about the pregnancy, had called his office repeatedly in the weeks after their breakup, but Marcus had instructed his assistant to handle any personal matters so he could focus on building his empire. By the time Sarah realized he wasn't going to call back, she was too proud to keep trying and too tired to fight for someone who clearly didn't want to be fought for. Le Bernardin loomed before her as the bus pulled to a stop, its warm golden lights promising the kind of luxury and comfort that felt increasingly foreign to Sarah's daily experience. The restaurant was consistently rated as one of the finest dining establishments in the city, the kind of place where movie stars celebrated Oscar nominations and billionaires closed deals over wine that cost more than most people's monthly salary. Sarah gathered her things and stepped off the bus into the rain, pulling her thin jacket tighter around her pregnant belly. The jacket had been a gift from her mother before they had stopped speaking, a consequence of Sarah's refusal to handle the situation in the way her family thought best. Her parents had wanted her to either marry Marcus quickly or terminate the pregnancy quietly, and when she had chosen neither option, they had made it clear that she was on her own. Walking through the service entrance, Sarah was immediately enveloped by the controlled chaos of a high-end restaurant preparing for evening service. The kitchen was a symphony of stainless steel and shouted orders, where plates were arranged like art pieces and every detail was scrutinized for perfection. The dining room, visible through the service windows, was an oasis of calm elegance, where wealthy customers would soon be seated at tables that cost more to reserve than Sarah's monthly rent. "Sarah, there you are." Maria Gonzalez, the restaurant's hostess and Sarah's closest friend at work, rushed over with the kind of warm smile that could light up a room. At 55, Maria had been working in high-end restaurants for over 30 years, and she had seen every type of customer, every kind of drama, and every variety of human kindness and cruelty that money could buy. She had taken Sarah under her wing from the first day, recognizing in the younger woman the same determination and grace under pressure that had kept Maria employed in an industry that wasn't always kind to women, especially women of color. "How are you feeling today, Mika?" Maria asked, her hands instinctively moving to check Sarah's condition with the practiced eye of someone who had raised 4 children of her own. "You look tired. Did you eat anything today?" Sarah smiled, touched by Maria's constant concern. In the absence of her own family's support, Maria had become something of a mother figure, always making sure Sarah was taking care of herself, always ready with advice about pregnancy and motherhood, always willing to cover the more physically demanding tasks when Sarah was struggling. "I'm fine, really. Just the usual pregnancy stuff. The baby's been active today." Sarah placed her hand on her belly, feeling the familiar flutter of movement that never failed to amaze her. "What's the situation tonight? Busy reservations?" Maria's expression darkened slightly. "Very busy, and we have some challenging customers tonight. Table 12 has the Wellington party. You know, the millionaire who owns half the city. His new wife is apparently very particular about service standards." Sarah felt her heart skip a beat. Wellington. It couldn't be the same Wellington, could it? Marcus's last name was Wellington, but it was a common enough name, and there were probably dozens of wealthy Wellingtons in the city. Still, the coincidence made her stomach clench with anxiety. "What time are they coming in?" she asked, trying to keep her voice casual. "They should be here any minute." "And Sarah?" Maria paused, studying her friend's face with concern. "Mrs. Wellington has a reputation for being difficult. She sent her food back 3 times last month and made one of the other servers cry. Just be prepared, okay? Don't let her get to you." Sarah nodded, straightening her shoulders and checking her appearance in the reflection of a stainless steel surface. She had learned to armor herself against difficult customers, to smile through insults and maintain her professionalism even when people treated her like she was less than human. It was a skill she had never wanted to develop, but one that had become essential for survival. The dining room at Le Bernardin was already beginning to fill with the evening's first customers. Business executives celebrating deals, wealthy couples on anniversary dinners, politicians and celebrities who knew they could eat here without being bothered by photographers or fans. Sarah moved through the space with practiced efficiency, checking her assigned tables, making sure water glasses were filled, ensuring that everything was perfect for the customers, who would soon be demanding perfection. Table 12 sat empty and waiting, its pristine white tablecloth and crystal stemware catching the light from the restaurant's carefully designed lighting system. It was the best table in the house, with an unobstructed view of the city lights and enough privacy for intimate conversation or important business discussions. Sarah had served many memorable meals at this table: proposals, business deals, birthday celebrations, and anniversary dinners. She had also cleared the plates from this table on the night Marcus had proposed to her, back when she had been a customer rather than staff, back when the future had seemed bright and certain. "Sarah, they're here," Maria whispered, appearing at her elbow with the subtle urgency that experienced restaurant staff used to communicate during service. The Wellington party just walked in. Sarah turned toward the entrance and felt the world tilt sideways. Marcus Wellington stood in the restaurant's foyer, looking exactly like the successful businessman he had become, and nothing like the ambitious but uncertain man she had fallen in love with. His suit was perfectly tailored, probably costing more than Sarah made in 3 months. His hair was styled with the kind of precision that came from expensive salons, and his posture radiated the confidence of someone who had never been told he didn't belong somewhere. But it was his eyes that struck Sarah the most. They had become cold and calculating. The warm brown she remembered replaced by something that looked at the world as a series of assets and liabilities. Beside him stood Victoria Ashworth Wellington, and Sarah understood immediately why Marcus had chosen her. Victoria was everything Sarah was not: tall where Sarah was average height, blonde where Sarah was brunette, elegant in a way that came from generations of wealth and privilege rather than hard work and determination. Her dress probably cost more than Sarah's entire wardrobe. Her jewelry caught the light like captured stars, and her smile was perfect in the way that came from years of professional photography and social training. They made a stunning couple, the kind that graced magazine covers and charity gala photographs. They looked like they had been designed to complement each other, like matching accessories in a life that was curated for maximum visual impact. Sarah felt a sharp pain in her chest that had nothing to do with pregnancy and everything to do with seeing the life that might have been hers if she had been different, if she had been enough, if love had been sufficient to overcome the vast differences in their backgrounds and aspirations. "Sarah?" Maria's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." "I'm fine," Sarah managed, though her voice sounded strange to her own ears. "I'm fine. Just give me a minute." But there wasn't time for minutes or processing or the luxury of falling apart. This was her job, her livelihood, her only way of supporting herself and her unborn child. She had served difficult customers before, had maintained her professionalism in challenging situations, had learned to separate her personal feelings from her work responsibilities. She could do this. She had to do this. Sarah watched as Maria escorted Marcus and Victoria to table 12, noting the way Marcus held the chair for his wife, the way Victoria looked around the restaurant with the casual ownership of someone who had never doubted her place in expensive spaces, the way they settled into their seats like they were claiming territory. From across the restaurant, Marcus looked successful and happy and completely unaware that his pregnant ex-girlfriend was about to serve him dinner. Sarah took a deep breath, checked her reflection one more time in a service mirror, and walked toward table 12. With the kind of professional composure that had become her superpower. "Good evening and welcome to Le Bernardin," she said as she approached their table, her voice warm and professional despite the chaos in her chest. "My name is Sarah, and I'll be taking care of you tonight. Can I start you with something to drink?" The words came automatically, honed by months of repetition. But Sarah kept her eyes focused on her notepad to avoid the moment of recognition that she knew was coming. She could feel Marcus's presence like electricity in the air, could sense the exact moment when he looked up from his phone and really saw her. The silence that followed seemed to stretch for eternity. "Oh my God," Marcus whispered, and Sarah could hear the shock and confusion and something that might have been guilt in those 3 small words. Victoria looked up sharply, her social radar immediately detecting the shift in atmosphere. "Is there a problem, darling?" Sarah finally raised her eyes to meet Marcus's gaze, and the impact was like a physical blow. 2 years ago, those eyes had looked at her with love and desire and the kind of future planning that comes with wanting to build a life with someone. Now they were wide with shock and something that looked almost like fear. "Hello, Marcus," Sarah said quietly, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "It's been a while." Marcus's mouth opened and closed without sound, his carefully constructed, composure cracking like a facade. His eyes moved from Sarah's face to her obvious pregnancy, and she could actually see the moment when the math clicked into place in his mind. 7 months pregnant. Their breakup had been 8 months ago. The timeline was unmistakable, undeniable, and devastating. Victoria's gaze sharpened as she looked between them, her social intelligence quickly piecing together the situation. "Marcus, how do you know our server?" The question hung in the air, like a challenge, and Sarah could see Marcus struggling with how much to reveal, how much truth his new life could handle. We used to know each other," Marcus said carefully, his voice strained with the effort of casual conversation. "Sarah, I didn't know you were working here." Sarah smiled with professional warmth that didn't reach her eyes. "Life takes interesting turns sometimes. Now, about those drinks. Can I get you started with something from our wine list? We have an excellent selection tonight." It was a masterful deflection, steering the conversation back to safer professional territory. But Victoria was too intelligent and too socially aware to let the moment pass without further investigation. "How interesting," Victoria said, her voice carrying the kind of silk-wrapped steel that came from a lifetime of social warfare. "And how do you two know each other exactly?" Sarah felt the weight of the question and knew that whatever she said next would have consequences that rippled far beyond this table, this restaurant, this single moment in time. She could lie, could claim they had met briefly through business or mutual friends. She could tell the truth and watch Marcus's carefully constructed life explode in real time. Or she could find a middle ground that preserved everyone's dignity while acknowledging the reality of their situation. "We dated for a while," Sarah said simply, her voice calm and matter-of-fact. "It was quite some time ago. Now I really should get your drink orders so the kitchen can begin preparing your meal." Marcus looked at her with something that might have been gratitude for her discretion. But Victoria's expression had shifted into something harder and more calculating. She was clearly putting pieces together, drawing conclusions, and preparing for a conversation that would happen later, in private, with consequences that Sarah could only imagine. "I'll have the chateau." "Margot," Victoria said, naming one of the most expensive wines on the menu, with the casualness of someone for whom price was never a consideration. "The 2010, if you have it." "Of course," Sarah replied, making a note that represented more money than she made in 2 weeks. "And for you, sir?" Marcus seemed to be struggling with the simple act of ordering a drink. He kept looking at Sarah as if he couldn't quite believe she was real, as if her presence had cracked open some carefully sealed compartment in his mind where he had stored all the things he preferred not to think about. "Scotch," he finally managed. "Whatever you have that's good." Sarah nodded and moved away from the table, grateful for the temporary reprieve from the intensity of their attention. In the service corridor between the dining room and the kitchen, she leaned against the wall and tried to catch her breath. Her heart was racing, her hands were shaking, and the baby was moving, restlessly as if responding to her emotional state. "Mia, what's wrong?" Maria appeared at her side, concern written across her face. "You look like you're about to faint." "The man at table 12, Sarah whispered. "That's Marcus, the father of my baby." Maria's eyes widened with understanding and something that looked like anger. "That son of a bitch? That's the man who left you pregnant and alone?" Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice to remain steady if she tried to speak. "Doom. You want me to get someone else to serve their table?" Maria asked immediately. "I can tell Mrs. Dubois that you're not feeling well. Nobody would question it, especially in your condition." The offer was tempting. Sarah could retreat to the safety of the kitchen, could avoid the painful awkwardness of serving the man who had abandoned her and his new wife, who clearly suspected the truth. But she also knew that she couldn't afford to lose tips from a table that would likely spend more. on dinner than Sarah made in a week. Every dollar mattered now, especially with the baby coming and maternity leave approaching faster than she was prepared for. "No," Sarah said, straightening her shoulders and finding the strength that had carried her through every difficult moment of the past 8 months. "I can handle this. It's just dinner service. I've handled worse customers." Maria looked doubtful but didn't argue. She had learned to respect Sarah's judgment and admired the younger woman's determination to handle her own problems with grace and dignity. "If you need anything at all, you just signal me," Maria said firmly. "I don't care if they're millionaires or royalty. Nobody gets to make my girls uncomfortable in my restaurant." Sarah smiled, touched by Maria's fierce protectiveness. It was the kind of maternal concern she had been missing since her own family had cut her off, and it meant more than Maria could possibly know. "I'll be fine," Sarah said, and this time she almost believed it. She returned to table 12 with their drinks, moving with the practiced efficiency that came from months of experience in high-end service. The wine cost $800 a bottle, and Sarah poured it with the kind of ceremony that such an expensive vintage demanded, even though part of her was thinking about how that money could have paid for 2 months of prenatal care. "Thank you," Victoria said, accepting her wine with the gracious smile of someone who had been trained from birth to be charming when it served her purposes. "This is perfect. Now, I think we're ready to hear about tonight's specials." Sarah launched into the evening's offerings, describing each dish with the kind of detail that fine dining customers expected. The restaurant's specials were works of art, each ingredient carefully sourced and prepared with techniques that bordered on molecular gastronomy. She spoke about seared foie gras with cherry gastrique, line-caught halibut with truffle emulsion, and Wagyu beef with exotic mushroom preparations, all while very aware that any one of these dishes cost more than she spent on groceries in a month. Marcus barely seemed to be listening to the descriptions. He kept staring at Sarah with an expression she couldn't quite read. Shock, certainly, but also something that looked like regret and possibly fear. His expensive scotch sat untouched on the table while he processed. The reality of seeing her again, of seeing her pregnant and working in service industry, of confronting the consequences of decisions he had clearly tried to forget. Victoria, on the other hand, was paying very close attention to everything. The specials, Sarah's demeanor, the obvious tension between Sarah and Marcus, the way Marcus couldn't seem to take his eyes off their server. Her questions about the food were pointed and numerous, keeping Sarah at the table longer than necessary, creating opportunities to observe and evaluate the situation. "And the halibut," Victoria said, her voice deceptively casual. "Is that sustainable? I'm very concerned about environmental responsibility. I sit on the board of several ecological foundations." Sarah provided the information about the restaurant's sustainable sourcing practices, but she could sense that Victoria's questions had nothing to do with environmental concerns and everything to do with keeping Sarah standing there, vulnerable and exposed, while Victoria gathered intelligence about whatever history existed between Sarah and her husband. "How wonderful," Victoria continued, "that you know so much about the sourcing. Have you been working in restaurants long? You seem very experienced." The question was loaded with implications, and Sarah recognized it as the kind of social probe that wealthy women used to establish dominance and gather information. Victoria was fishing for details about Sarah's background, her education, her circumstances, and probably her relationship with Marcus. "I've been here about 6 months, Sarah replied diplomatically. "The restaurant has very high standards for staff knowledge about ingredients and preparation methods." 6 months, Victoria repeated thoughtfully. "And before that?" Sarah felt the trap closing around her. Any answer she gave would reveal more about her circumstances, would feed Victoria's obvious suspicions, would provide Ammunition for whatever confrontation was clearly brewing between the married couple. "I worked in marketing," Sarah said simply, offering the minimum information necessary to answer the question. "Marketing," Victoria said, with the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes. "How interesting. What kind of marketing?" Marcus finally found his voice. "Victoria, I think we should order. Sarah probably has other tables to attend to." It was clearly an attempt to rescue Sarah from his wife's interrogation. But Victoria wasn't easily deterred from a conversation she was clearly enjoying. "Oh, but I'm so interested in hearing about Sarah's background," Victoria said sweetly. "It's not often you meet someone who's made such an interesting career transition. From marketing to fine dining service, there must be quite a story there." Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. Victoria knew exactly what she was doing, using her social position and economic power to make Sarah uncomfortable, to establish dominance, to make it clear who belonged in this restaurant as a customer and who was just staff. "Sometimes life takes unexpected turns," Sarah said with as much dignity as she could muster. "Now, have you decided on your appetizers?" It was another attempt to redirect the conversation back to professional territory, but Sarah could see that Victoria wasn't finished with her social excavation. "Unexpected turns," Victoria mused. "Yes, I suppose they do, especially for young women who find themselves in challenging circumstances." The comment was clearly directed at Sarah's pregnancy, and the implication was unmistakable. Victoria had put together enough pieces to understand that Sarah was pregnant, unmarried, and working in a service job, and she was using that information to establish her own superiority. Sarah felt anger rise in her chest, not just at Victoria's condescension, but at the entire situation that had brought her to this moment. Here she was, pregnant and working to support herself, being looked down upon by a woman who had married for money and status, being judged by someone who had never had to struggle for anything in her entire privileged life. But she also knew that losing her temper would only make things worse. She needed this job, needed the tips, needed to maintain her professional reputation in an industry where word of mouth could make or break a server's career. Life is full of challenges and opportunities, Sarah replied evenly. "Now, I really do need to take your order so the kitchen can begin preparation." Marcus looked at her with something that might have been admiration for her composure, but he still seemed incapable of intervening in any meaningful way in his wife's passive-aggressive assault. They finally ordered, Victoria choosing the most expensive items on the menu with additional modifications that would make the kitchen's job more difficult. Marcus ordering almost at random, as if food was the least important thing on his mind. Sarah wrote everything down with professional precision, repeated the order back to confirm accuracy, and escaped to the kitchen with a sense of relief that was probably visible from space. In the kitchen, she leaned against a prep counter and tried to process what had just happened. Seeing Marcus again was painful enough, but seeing him with Victoria, seeing how completely he had moved on while Sarah struggled with the consequences of their relationship, was almost unbearable. The baby kicked hard, as if responding to her emotional state, and Sarah rubbed her belly absently while she tried to figure out how to get through the rest of the evening with her dignity intact. "Table 12 giving you trouble?" asked Carlos Mendoza, one of the line cooks who had become protective of Sarah over the months they had worked together. Carlos was a father of 3 who understood the challenges of supporting a family, and he had taken it upon himself to look out for Sarah in the way he would want someone to look out for his own daughters. "Just demanding customers," Sarah said, not wanting to get into the personal details of her situation. "Nothing I can't handle." Carlos studied her face with the kind of perception that came from years of reading people. "You sure about that, Mija? You look like someone just kicked your dog." Sarah managed to smile. "I'm fine. Really, just pregnancy hormones making everything feel more intense." It wasn't entirely a lie. Pregnancy did make emotions more volatile, did make small slights feel like major injuries, did make it harder to maintain the emotional distance necessary for service work. But this wasn't about hormones. This was about coming face to face with the man who had promised her forever and then disappeared the moment their relationship became inconvenient. She delivered their appetizers with professional efficiency, noting that Victoria continued to find reasons to extend their interactions. Questions about the preparation method, requests for additional condiments, comments about the presentation that required responses, all designed to keep Sarah standing at their table, exposed and uncomfortable. Marcus barely touched his food. He kept looking at Sarah with an expression that was becoming increasingly troubled, as if seeing her in this situation was forcing him to confront aspects of himself that he preferred to keep buried. "Is everything prepared to your satisfaction?" Sarah asked after they had had time to taste their courses. "It's adequate," Victoria said with the kind of faint praise that was actually an insult. "Though I have to say I'm surprised by the service tonight. Usually, Le Bernardin maintains much higher standards." The criticism was clearly personal rather than professional. Sarah had provided excellent service, and Victoria knew it. This was about power, about establishing dominance, about making it clear that Sarah was beneath her notice, except as a target for casual cruelty. Sarah felt her professional composure beginning to crack. She had endured months of difficult customers, had smiled through countless small humiliations, had maintained her dignity in the face of people who treated service staff like they were less than human. But this was different. This was personal, and it was coming from the woman who had everything that Sarah had once thought would be hers. "I apologize if the service hasn't met your expectations," Sarah said, her voice still professional, but with an edge that hadn't been there before. "Is there something specific I can do to improve your experience?" Victoria smiled with the kind of satisfaction that comes from successfully getting under someone's skin. "Oh, I think you're doing exactly what you're capable of doing." The insult was delivered with such casual cruelty that it took Sarah's breath away. Victoria wasn't just commenting on her service, she was dismissing Sarah's entire worth as a human being, reducing her to nothing more than a pregnant server who had failed to meet expectations. Marcus finally spoke up. "Victoria, that's enough." His voice was quiet but firm, and Sarah could see that he was finally beginning to understand what his wife was doing. But his intervention came too late, and with too little force to undo the damage that had already been done. Victoria looked at her husband with surprise and something that might have been anger. "Enough of what, darling? I'm simply providing feedback about the service quality." "You're being cruel," Marcus said. And for a moment, Sarah caught a glimpse of the man she had once loved, the man who had been capable of kindness and genuine emotion before success had hardened him into someone she barely recognized. Victoria's eyes flashed with something dangerous. "No, cruel. I'm being honest about service standards. If you have a problem with that, perhaps we should discuss it later, in private." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Victoria was making it clear that Marcus's defense of Sarah would have consequences, that challenging her in public would result in a much more serious confrontation once they were alone. Sarah could see Marcus weighing his options, could watch him calculate the cost of defending her against the price he would pay at home. And in that moment of hesitation, she saw everything she needed to know about who he had become and what his marriage was really like. "It's fine," Sarah said quietly, stepping in to diffuse a situation that was rapidly becoming explosive. "I understand that not every dining experience meets expectations. Perhaps I can have the manager speak with you about any concerns." It was a graceful exit strategy that allowed everyone to save face while removing Sarah from the line of fire. But Victoria wasn't interested in graceful exits. She was enjoying her moment of power too much to let it end easily. "Oh, I don't think that's necessary," Victoria said with false sweetness. I'm sure you're doing the best you can with your current situation. Her eyes dropped meaningfully to Sarah's pregnant belly, and the implication was crystal clear. Victoria was suggesting that Sarah's pregnancy was affecting her ability to do her job, that her condition made her somehow less capable, less professional, less worthy of respect. Sarah felt something snap inside her chest. All the months of biting her tongue, of accepting charity, of smiling while people looked down on her, of pretending that working while pregnant was easy and dignified when it was actually exhausting and humiliating, all of it crystallized into a moment of pure, white-hot anger. "My current situation," Sarah repeated, her voice dangerously quiet, "is that I'm working to support myself and my child, which last I checked was exactly what responsible adults do when they find themselves facing unexpected challenges." The words hung in the air like a challenge, and Sarah could see Victoria's mask of social grace beginning to slip. This wasn't how the interaction was supposed to go. Service staff were supposed to accept criticism gracefully, were supposed to apologize and retreat, were supposed to know their place in the social hierarchy. How admirable. Victoria said, her voice turning cold, though one does wonder about the circumstances that led to such unexpected challenges. It was a direct attack on Sarah's character, an implication that her pregnancy was the result of poor judgment or moral failing. And it was delivered with the kind of casual cruelty that came from a lifetime of believing that money and social status gave you the right to judge and diminish other people. Marcus looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. "Victoria, please. This is inappropriate." Inappropriate. Victoria's voice rose slightly, drawing attention from nearby tables. "What's inappropriate is being served by someone who clearly can't handle the demands of fine dining service. What's inappropriate is having to watch our server struggle through basic tasks because she's obviously not in any condition to be working." The attack was now fully public, and Sarah could feel the eyes of other customers turning toward their table. She was being humiliated in front of an entire restaurant, being reduced to nothing more than a spectacle for Victoria's entertainment. But something had changed in Sarah during those months of struggle and survival. She had learned that dignity wasn't something that could be taken from you. It was something you chose to maintain, regardless of how other people treated you. She had discovered strength she never knew she possessed, had developed the kind of inner steel that comes from facing your worst fears and discovering that you can survive them. "You're absolutely right," Sarah said, her voice calm and clear and carrying perfectly to every table within earshot. "I am struggling. I'm 7 months pregnant, working 2 jobs to support myself, because the father of my child decided that his new life was more important than taking responsibility for his actions. I'm tired, I'm scared, and I'm doing the best I can with a situation that I never planned for." The dining room had gone completely silent. Every conversation had stopped, every fork had been set down, every eye was focused on the drama unfolding at table 12. "But you know what I'm not struggling with," Sarah continued, her voice gaining strength with each word. "I'm not struggling with my conscience. I'm not struggling with looking at myself in the mirror. I'm not struggling with the knowledge that I've turned my back on someone who needed me." Marcus had gone completely. A white. He understood exactly what Sarah was saying, exactly who her words were really directed at, exactly what truths she was revealing to a room full of witnesses. Victoria looked around the restaurant with growing horror, realizing that her attempt to humiliate a pregnant server had backfired spectacularly. She was now the villain in a public drama, the wealthy woman bullying someone who was clearly struggling and vulnerable. "How dare you?" Victoria hissed, her social mask finally slipping completely. "How dare you stand there and judge me? You don't know anything about my life, about my marriage, about what I've earned." "You're right," Sarah said with devastating calm. "I don't know anything about what you've earned. But I know what I've earned. I've earned the right to work with dignity, to be treated with basic human respect, and to serve customers who understand that being wealthy doesn't give them permission to be cruel. The words hit Victoria like physical blows. She was being lectured on human decency by a pregnant server, being called out for her behavior in front of an audience of her social peers, being forced to confront the ugliness of her own actions. "Marcus," Victoria said, her voice sharp with command. "We're leaving. Now." But Marcus didn't move. He was staring at Sarah with an expression that was part admiration, part guilt, and part something that looked almost like recognition. As if he was seeing her, really, seeing her for the first time in months. "Marcus!" Victoria's voice cracked like a whip. "I said we're leaving!" Sarah looked at Marcus one last time, and in that look was everything they had once meant to each other, everything that had been lost, and everything that could never be recovered. Then she turned and walked away, leaving him to make his choice. Marcus sat frozen for a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity. Around him, the restaurant's other customers were beginning to whisper among themselves, processing what they had just witnessed. Victoria was gathering her purse and preparing to storm out, her face flushed with embarrassment and rage. And Sarah was walking away with her head held high, having found her voice and her strength at the exact moment when she needed them most. "The check," Marcus said suddenly. "I need to pay the check." Victoria stared at him in disbelief. "Are you serious? After that scene? After she humiliated us in front of everyone?" "She didn't humiliate us," Marcus said quietly. "She told the truth." He signaled for the check, left cash on the table that was far more than the bill required, and followed his wife out of the restaurant. But not before taking one last look back at Sarah, who was already at another table, serving other customers, continuing with her work as if nothing had happened. Outside, Victoria unleashed the full force of her fury. What the hell was that? Who is she really? "Marcus? And don't you dare lie to me again." Marcus stood in the rain, feeling the water soak through his expensive suit, and realized that he was tired of lying to Victoria, to himself, to everyone who had helped him build a life based on carefully constructed deceptions. "She's the mother of my child," he said simply. The words hung between them like an explosion, destroying in an instant the carefully crafted facade of their perfect marriage. Victoria stared at him with an expression that cycled through shock, rage, betrayal, and finally cold calculation. "Your child?" "Yes." "The baby she's carrying, it's yours?" "Yes." Victoria was quiet for a long moment, her mind working through the implications, the legal ramifications, the social consequences, the ways this revelation would affect her own carefully planned life. "How long have you known?" she asked finally. Marcus thought about lying, about claiming he had just learned the truth tonight. But he was tired of lies, tired of pretending, tired of being the kind of man who could walk away from his responsibilities without consequences. "I suspected," he said. "The timing. It was possible. But I chose not to find out for sure." "You chose not to find out." Victoria's voice was deadly quiet. "You chose to marry me while you had a pregnant ex-girlfriend you were refusing to acknowledge." "Yes." Victoria laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "Do you have any idea what this means? Any idea what you've done to me, to us, to everything we've built together?" Marcus looked back at the restaurant, where Sarah was probably still working, still serving customers, still doing whatever it took to support herself and their child. "I know what I've done to her." "I don't care what you've done to her!" Victoria's voice rose to a near shout. "I care about what you've done to me. I care about what this does to our reputation, our social standing, our business, relationships." And in that moment, Marcus understood something fundamental about his marriage, about Victoria, about the life he had chosen. Victoria's first concern wasn't about the child, wasn't about Sarah's well-being, wasn't about the human cost of his decisions. Her first concern was about how this situation would affect her own status and comfort. "We'll get through this," Victoria said, her voice becoming more controlled as she shifted into damage control mode. "We'll hire lawyers. We'll handle this quietly. We'll make sure it doesn't become public knowledge. There are ways to manage these situations." "Manage?" Marcus repeated. "Of course. We'll arrange for child support, something generous enough to keep her quiet but structured so it doesn't acknowledge paternity publicly. We'll make sure she understands that any attempts to contact you directly or make claims about the child will result in legal consequences." Victoria was speaking as if Sarah was a problem to be solved rather than a person who was struggling, as if their child was a potential scandal rather than a human being who would need love and support. "She doesn't want to be managed," Marcus said quietly. "She just wants to be able to take care of our child." "Our child?" Victoria's eyes flashed dangerously. "There is no our child, Marcus. There's a child that you may or may not have fathered with a woman you dated before our marriage. That's very different from our child." Marcus felt something shift inside him, some fundamental change in how he saw his situation and his choices. Victoria was right that the child wasn't theirs together, but the child was his, was part of him, was a responsibility he had been running from for months. "I need to help her," he said. "You need to protect us," Victoria corrected. "You need to think about what this means for our future, our plans, our investments. You need to consider what happens to the merger if this becomes public. What happens to our social relationships if people find out you abandoned a pregnant girlfriend to marry me?" She was right about the practical consequences. If word got out that Marcus had left a pregnant woman to marry for social status, it would damage his reputation and potentially his business. The merger might fall through, social invitations might dry up, business relationships might suffer. But as Marcus stood in the rain, thinking about Sarah working through her pregnancy to support herself, thinking about his child growing up without a father, thinking about the kind of man he had become, he realized that he didn't care about the practical consequences anymore. "I'm going back in there," he said. Victoria grabbed his arm. "Are you insane? Haven't you done enough damage for one night?" "I've done 8 months of damage," Marcus said, gently removing her hand from his arm. "Tonight I'm going to start trying to fix it." He turned and walked back toward the restaurant, leaving Victoria standing in the rain, shouting after him about lawyers and reputation and everything that would be destroyed if he didn't come to his senses. But Marcus had finally come to his senses. That was exactly the problem. Inside the restaurant, Sarah was clearing a table when she saw Marcus walking back through the entrance. Her first instinct was panic. Had he come back to continue the confrontation? Had Victoria sent him back to threaten her about keeping quiet? Had her moment of honesty cost her the job she desperately needed? Marcus approached her slowly, as if she were a wild animal that might bolt if he moved too quickly. The other customers were still watching, still processing the drama they had witnessed, still waiting to see how this extraordinary evening would resolve itself. "Sarah," Marcus said quietly, "can I talk to you? Please." Sarah looked around the restaurant, acutely aware that they were still the center of attention. "I'm working, Marcus. I can't afford to lose this job." "I know, I understand. But please, just 5 minutes." Something in his voice made her pause. This wasn't the cold, calculating Marcus who had married Victoria for status and convenience. This wasn't even the conflicted Marcus who had sat silently while his wife humiliated her. This was someone else entirely, someone who looked exhausted and ashamed, and maybe even a little bit like the man she had once loved. "Maria," Sarah called to the hostess, "can you cover my section for a few minutes?" Maria nodded, her expression making it clear that she would be keeping a close eye on the situation and would intervene if necessary. Sarah led Marcus to a quiet corner of the restaurant, away from the main dining room, but still visible to staff who could help if needed. Her hands were shaking slightly, though whether from adrenaline or exhaustion or the emotional toll of the evening, she couldn't say. What staff who could help if needed? Her hands were shaking slightly, though whether from adrenaline or exhaustion or the emotional toll of the evening, she couldn't say. What do you want, Marcus? She asked, not unkindly but without warmth. Marcus looked at her for a long moment, really looked at her, and seemed to be seeing her situation clearly for the first time. The tiredness around her eyes, the careful way she moved to accommodate her pregnancy, the uniform that marked her as service staff, the dignity she maintained despite everything she was facing. I want to apologize, he said finally, for tonight, for the last 8 months, for all of it. Sarah had imagined this moment countless times during her pregnancy. She had fantasized about Marcus finding her, apologizing, begging for forgiveness, declaring his love and promising to be the father their child deserved. She had also imagined herself responding with either forgiveness or righteous anger, depending on her mood and how charitable she was feeling. But now that the moment was actually happening, she felt mostly tired. Okay, she said simply. Apology noted. Marcus looked surprised by her lack of reaction. That's it? That's all you have to say? Sarah rubbed her back, which was aching from the stress of the evening and the demands of standing for hours while pregnant. What do you want me to say, Marcus? That I forgive you? That I understand why you chose Victoria over me? That I'm grateful you finally acknowledged my existence? Marcus started, then stopped, clearly struggling to articulate what he actually wanted from this conversation. You want me to make you feel better about your choices, Sarah said with devastating accuracy. You want me to tell you that it's okay, that I understand, that you're not a bad person for walking away when things got complicated. Marcus flinched, as if she had slapped him. That's not, I don't expect. Because here's the thing, Marcus, Sarah continued, her voice gaining strength. I don't owe you absolution. I don't owe you understanding. I don't owe you anything except the courtesy of listening to your apology, which I've done. She was right, and they both knew it. Marcus had come back expecting, what? Forgiveness? Gratitude? A chance to ease his guilt without actually changing anything about his situation? The baby, Marcus said suddenly. It's mine, isn't it? Sarah looked at him with an expression that was part pity, part exhaustion. Does it matter? You've made it clear that you don't want to be involved. You have a wife, a life, a reputation to protect. Why complicate things now? Because it's my child, Marcus said, and for the first time that evening, his voice carried real conviction. Because you shouldn't have to do this alone, because I was wrong to walk away. Sarah studied his face, looking for the calculation she had learned to expect from him, the careful weighing of costs and benefits that had replaced genuine emotion in his decision-making process. But all she saw was exhaustion and regret, and something that looked almost like the man she had once fallen in love with. What are you saying exactly? She asked. Marcus ran his hand through his hair, a gesture she remembered from their time together, something he did when he was struggling with a difficult decision. I'm saying I want to help. I want to support you, support the baby. I want to be involved. Involved how? Weekend visits, birthday cards, child support payments that come with non-disclosure agreements. The bitterness in her voice was earned, and Marcus couldn't argue with it. I don't know, he admitted. I just know that what I've been doing, pretending you don't exist, pretending this isn't happening, it's wrong. It's not who I want to be. Sarah felt the baby kick, as if responding to the sound of its father's voice, and placed her hand on her belly instinctively. The gesture wasn't lost on Marcus, who looked at her pregnant form with an expression that was part wonder, part fear. Can I? He asked, gesturing toward her belly. Sarah hesitated. Letting Marcus feel the baby move would make this real in a way that conversation couldn't. would create a connection that might be difficult to manage or control. But it would also give their child the chance to know its father, even briefly, even in this strange and complicated way. She nodded. Marcus approached slowly, as if he were approaching something sacred and fragile. When he placed his hand on her belly, the baby immediately responded with a strong kick that made him gasp with surprise and something that looked like joy. "Oh my God," he whispered. That's really happening in there." For a moment, they stood there together, connected by the life they had created, by the small person who was making their presence known with increasingly vigorous movements. It was intimate in a way that transcended their current circumstances, a reminder of what they had once meant to each other and what they had created together. "The baby's been active today," Sarah said softly. "I think all the stress and excitement is making them restless." "Them?" Marcus asked. "I don't know the sex yet. I've been calling the baby them because it feels more, I don't know, more like a person that way." Marcus nodded, understanding the strange grammar of pregnancy, the way expectant mothers talked about their unborn children as if they were already complete. People with personalities and preferences. "When are you due?" he asked. 2 months, maybe a little less. The reality of that timeline hit Marcus like a physical blow. 2 months. In 2 months, he would be a father, and Sarah would be a mother, and their child would be born into a situation that was complicated beyond anything either of them had imagined when they had first fallen in love. "What happens now?" Marcus asked. Sarah removed his hand from her belly gently, stepping back. To create distance between them, the moment of intimacy was over, and reality was reasserting itself. "Now you go home to your wife," she said practically. "You figure out what this means for your marriage, your business, your life, and I go back to work. But we need to talk about this more. We need to figure out arrangements, support, how we're going to handle..." "Marcus." Sarah's voice was firm, but not unkind. "I've been handling this alone for 8 months. I can handle it for a few more days while you figure out what you actually want and what you're actually willing to do." She was right, as she had been about most things that evening. Marcus had spent months avoiding this conversation, avoiding this decision, avoiding the consequences of his choices. He couldn't expect to resolve everything in a 5-minute conversation in a restaurant corner. "Can I call you?" he asked. Can we talk tomorrow?" Sarah considered the question carefully. Talking to Marcus meant opening a door that had been closed for months, meant potentially disrupting the careful equilibrium she had built around her independence and self-reliance. But it also meant giving their child a chance to have a father, and that was worth almost any risk. "I get off work at midnight," she said finally. "Call me tomorrow evening after 7. We can talk then." Marcus nodded, grateful for even that small concession. "Thank you for listening, for letting me feel the baby kick, for giving me a chance to try to do better." Sarah looked at him one last time, seeing both the man who had broken her heart and the father of her child, understanding that those could be the same person while still being fundamentally different roles. "Don't thank me yet," she said quietly. "Thank me when you actually follow through." Marcus left the restaurant for the second time that night, but this time he walked differently. His steps were slower, more thoughtful, weighted with the knowledge of what he had learned and what he now had to face. Victoria was waiting in the car, her face a mask of cold fury that had been refined during his absence into something more dangerous and calculating. "Well," she said, as he got into the back seat beside her. "We need to talk," Marcus said. "Yes, we certainly do. We need to talk about damage control, about legal strategies, about how we're going to contain this situation before it destroys everything we've worked for." Marcus looked out the window at the restaurant, where Sarah was probably returning to her tables, finishing her shift, continuing with the work that supported her and their unborn child. "No," he said quietly. "We need to talk about what kind of man I want to be and what kind of marriage this really is." Victoria stared at him as if he had suddenly started speaking a foreign language. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the fact that I'm going to be a father in 2 months, and I need to decide what that means." "It doesn't mean anything," Victoria said sharply. "It means you write a check every month and avoid public acknowledgement. It means we handle this like adults, quietly and efficiently." "Like adults?" Marcus repeated thoughtfully. "Victoria, what would an adult do in this situation? What would a good person do?" Victoria's eyes narrowed dangerously. "A good person would think about their spouse, their commitments, their responsibilities to the people who matter." "The people who matter," Marcus said. "Including my child? Including your wife?" Victoria's voice rose, and the driver glanced nervously in the rearview mirror. "Including the woman you made vows to, the woman who trusted you, the woman whose life you're now threatening to destroy with this mess from your past." Marcus thought about Sarah, 7 months pregnant and working to support herself, maintaining her dignity in the face of Victoria's cruelty, facing single motherhood with courage and grace. Then he thought about Victoria, whose primary concern seemed to be how the situation would affect her own comfort and status. "What if we helped her?" Marcus asked suddenly. Victoria stared at him in disbelief. "Helped her? Marcus, she's not our responsibility. She's a complication that needs to be managed, not a charity case that needs to be adopted. She's the mother of my child. She's your ex-girlfriend who got pregnant and is now trying to use that pregnancy to get back into your life." The accusation hung in the air between them, and Marcus realized that Victoria truly believed what she was saying. In her world, relationships were strategic, emotions were weapons, and pregnancy was a tool for manipulation rather than a biological reality that created responsibilities and connections. "That's not what this is," Marcus said quietly. "Isn't it? Think about it, Marcus. What are the odds that your ex-girlfriend just happens to be working at your favorite restaurant? What are the odds that she just happens to be assigned to serve our table? This whole thing was orchestrated to make you feel guilty, to manipulate you into supporting her." Marcus considered Victoria's theory and realized it revealed more about her own mindset than it did about Sarah's motivations. Victoria couldn't imagine that someone might simply be working to support themselves without ulterior motives. Couldn't conceive of the idea that Sarah might not want anything from Marcus except the basic acknowledgement of their child's existence. "You're wrong," he said. "Am I? Then explain to me why she gave that little speech in front of the entire restaurant. Explain to me why she felt the need to humiliate us publicly instead of handling this privately." Marcus thought about the confrontation, about the moment when Sarah had finally found her voice and used it to defend herself against Victoria's attacks. It hadn't been calculated or manipulative. It had been the natural response of someone who had reached their limit and refused to be pushed any further. "She was defending herself," Marcus said. "You were attacking her, and she defended herself." Victoria's laugh was cold and bitter. "I was making conversation with our server. If she chose to interpret normal social interaction as an attack, that says more about her mental state than it does about my behavior." And in that moment, Marcus understood something fundamental about his wife. Victoria genuinely didn't see her behavior as cruel or inappropriate. In her world, people were divided into categories, those who mattered and those who didn't, and different rules applied to each group. Service staff, people without money or social connections, people who depended on others for their livelihood, simply didn't deserve the same consideration as people who belonged to Victoria's social class. "Normal. Social interaction," Marcus repeated. "Yes, I was asking questions about her background, making polite conversation. If she felt uncomfortable, that's because she was being confronted with the consequences of her own poor choices. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. Victoria truly believed that Sarah deserved whatever hardship she was facing, that pregnancy and poverty were punishments for moral failings, that working in service was evidence of personal inadequacy rather than economic necessity. "What if it had been you?" Marcus asked suddenly. Victoria looked at him with confusion. "What if what had been me? What if you had gotten pregnant and I had left you to handle it alone? What if you had to work as a server while pregnant, had to smile while customers looked down on you, had to choose between medical care and rent?" Victoria's expression shifted to something between outrage and disgust. "That would never happen to me." "Why not?" "Because I'm not the kind of person who gets herself into that situation. Because I have family, resources, education, connections. Because I know how to protect myself. Sarah has education. Sarah had resources before she lost her job. Sarah has connections. She had me. Until I decided that my social status was more important than my responsibilities." Victoria stared at him as if he had suddenly become a stranger. "Are you seriously comparing me to her? Are you seriously suggesting that I could end up in the same situation as some pregnant server working for tips? I'm suggesting that the only difference between you and her is luck and circumstances. I'm suggesting that maybe the kind of person who ends up in difficult situations is just a person who trusted the wrong man." The conversation was interrupted by their arrival at the penthouse. Victoria stalked out of the car and into the building without waiting for Marcus, her anger radiating from every line of her body. Marcus followed more slowly, dreading the conversation that was clearly going to continue upstairs. Their apartment was a monument to wealth and taste, filled with art and furniture that cost more than most people's annual salaries. Victoria moved through the space like she owned it, which legally she partially did, straightening objects that didn't need straightening, adjusting flowers that were already perfect, channeling her anger into the kind of domestic control that wealthy women used to manage their emotions. "I cannot believe you're doing this to me," she said without turning around. "I cannot believe you're throwing away our marriage, our future, our entire life for some woman who's trying to trap you with a pregnancy." Marcus poured himself a drink and sat down heavily on the couch that cost more than Sarah's annual rent. What if she's not trying to trap me? What if she just needs help? Victoria whirled around, her face flushed with fury. Then she can get help from social services. She can get help from her family. She can get help from anyone except my husband. What if I want to help her? Then you're an idiot who's being manipulated by a woman who knows exactly how to play on your guilt. Marcus thought about Sarah's face when she had told him not to thank her yet, when she had made it clear that his promises meant nothing until he actually followed through. That wasn't the face of someone who was trying to manipulate him. That was the face of someone who had learned not to expect anything from him and was protecting herself accordingly. "I don't think she wants my help," Marcus said quietly. "I think she's learned to survive without it." "Then why did she make that scene tonight? Why did she humiliate us in front of everyone if she doesn't want anything from you?" Marcus replayed the confrontation in his mind, remembering the moment when Sarah had finally reached her breaking point. She was tired of being treated like she was invisible. She was tired of being judged for circumstances that weren't entirely her fault. She was tired of being polite to people who saw her as less than human. "She is less than human," Victoria exploded. "She's a pregnant server working for tips. She's exactly what she appears to be, someone who made bad choices and is now facing the consequences." The words hung in the air like poison, revealing depths of cruelty that Marcus had never fully recognized in his wife. Victoria didn't just dismiss Sarah, she genuinely believed that Sarah was inherently inferior, that poverty and struggle were evidence of moral failing, that people who worked in service jobs deserved whatever hardship they faced. "She's the mother of my child," Marcus said quietly. "Stop saying that." Victoria's voice rose to a shout. "Stop talking about that. That thing as if it's some kind of miracle. It's an accident, a mistake, a complication that needs to be handled. That thing is my child. That thing is going to destroy our marriage." "No," Marcus said, standing up slowly. "This conversation is going to destroy our marriage. The things you're saying, the person you're revealing yourself to be, that's what's going to destroy our marriage." Victoria stared at him with an expression that cycled through disbelief, rage, and finally cold calculation. "Fine. You want to know who I really am? I'm someone who doesn't apologize for having standards. I'm someone who doesn't pretend that all people are equal when they clearly aren't. I'm someone who married you for the life you could provide, not for some romantic fantasy about love conquering all. At least you're being honest. I've always been honest. You knew exactly what this marriage was when you proposed to me. You knew I was marrying you for your money and status, just like you were marrying me for my connections and social position. The only difference is that I'm not. Ashamed of being practical about relationships." She was right, and Marcus couldn't deny it. He had proposed to Victoria because she fit perfectly into the life he was trying to build, because she looked right on his arm at business dinners and charity galas, because she came from the kind of family that opened doors and created opportunities. Love had never been part of the equation. It had been a business arrangement wrapped in wedding silk. "So what happens now?" Marcus asked. Victoria's expression shifted, becoming more controlled and strategic. "Now we decide what this marriage is worth to both of us. Now we decide whether we're going to let one night of drama destroy everything we've built together. And if I decide that I need to support my child, then you do it quietly, discreetly, in a way that doesn't affect our public life or our social relationships. You write checks, you stay away from her, and you make sure that nobody ever connects you to that situation." Marcus thought about Sarah working through her pregnancy, about his child growing up without knowing their father, about the kind of man he would become if he chose comfort and reputation over responsibility and connection. What if I want more than that? What if I want to actually be involved in my child's life? Victoria's mask slipped completely, revealing the cold calculation that lay beneath her social grace. "Then you'll be doing it as my ex-husband. Because I will not be publicly humiliated by being married to a man who has children with service staff. I will not have my social position compromised by your inability to handle your past relationships appropriately." The ultimatum was clear, and Marcus realized that he was facing the most important decision of his life. He could choose Victoria, comfort, social status, and a life built on careful deceptions. Or he could choose responsibility, uncertainty, and the chance to be the kind of father his child deserved. "I need time to think," he said. "You need time to come to your senses," Victoria corrected. "You need time to remember what's important and what's just guilt-induced sentimentality." She walked toward their bedroom, pausing at the doorway to deliver one final shot. "Think very carefully about what you're willing to give up, Marcus. Think about what your life will look like if you choose her over me. Think about what you'll be left with when the guilt wears off and you realize you've destroyed everything for a woman who never belonged in your world to begin with." She disappeared into the bedroom, leaving Marcus alone with his thoughts, his guilt, and the most difficult decision of his life. Outside, the storm was finally beginning to clear, but inside Marcus's carefully constructed world, everything was falling apart. And for the first time in years, he wasn't sure if that was a tragedy or an opportunity. He walked to the window and looked out at the city lights, thinking about Sarah somewhere out there, finishing her shift, going home to her tiny apartment, preparing for single motherhood with courage and dignity that he was only beginning to understand. Tomorrow, he would call her. Tomorrow, he would begin the difficult process of figuring out how to be a father, a decent human being, and possibly even a man worthy of the woman he had once loved and then abandoned. Tonight, he would sit with the ruins of his marriage and try to figure out who he really wanted to be when everything he had built for himself crumbled away. The answer, he was beginning to realize, might be simpler than he had ever imagined. He wanted to be the kind of man who didn't abandon pregnant women. He wanted to be the kind of father his child could be proud of. He wanted to be the kind of person who did the right thing, even when it was difficult, even when it cost him everything he had spent years accumulating. For the first time in years, Marcus fell asleep thinking about someone other than himself. Meanwhile, across the city, Sarah was finally ending her shift at Le Bernardin. The rest of the evening had passed in a blur of professional efficiency and emotional exhaustion. Her other customers had been mercifully normal, wealthy, demanding, but not personally invested in destroying her dignity. Word of the confrontation had spread through the staff, and her co-workers had rallied around her with the kind of solidarity that came from shared experience in the service industry. "You handled that beautifully, Mija," Maria said as they cleaned up their sections and prepared to close. "That woman was a real piece of work, but you didn't let her break you." Sarah smiled wearily. "I'm getting good at not letting people break me. It's becoming a specialty." Carlos emerged from the kitchen, having finished his prep work for tomorrow's service. "I heard what happened out there. That guy, the rich one, he came back to talk to you?" Sarah nodded, not sure how much she wanted to share about her personal situation with her co-workers. They had been kind and supportive, but this was complicated in ways that went beyond normal workplace drama. "He's the father of your baby, isn't he?" Maria asked gently. "The way he looked at you, the way he reacted when you told that witch off. That wasn't just guilt about being a bad customer." Sarah considered denying it, maintaining the privacy she had worked so hard to protect. But these people had become her family over the past months, had supported her through pregnancy symptoms and difficult customers and the thousand small challenges of working while expecting. They deserved honesty. "Yes," she said simply. "He's the father." Carlos swore softly in Spanish. "That son of a bitch left you to deal with this alone while he married that ice queen?" "It's complicated," Sarah said, though even as the words came out, she realized how inadequate they were. It wasn't really complicated at all. Marcus had chosen status and comfort over responsibility and love. Everything else was just details. "No, it's not complicated," Maria said firmly. "A man gets a woman pregnant, he takes responsibility, period. Everything else is just excuses and selfishness." Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes, not from sadness, but from the simple relief of having someone else validate what she had been feeling. For months, she had spent so much time wondering if she was being unreasonable, if she should have tried harder to reach Marcus, if she was somehow at fault for the situation she found herself in. What did he want when he came back? Carlos asked. To apologize, to be involved, somehow. Sarah touched her belly absently, feeling the baby's quiet movements. "I don't know if he means it. I don't know if he's capable of following through." "What do you want?" Maria asked. "Not what's practical, not what's safe. What do you actually want?" Sarah thought about the question as she finished her closing duties. What did she want? She wanted her child to have a father who loved them. She wanted financial security that didn't depend on tips and the kindness of strangers. She wanted to not feel so desperately alone in facing the biggest challenge of her life. But she also wanted to be chosen for the right reasons, not out of guilt or obligation. She wanted to matter. To someone, not just as the mother of their child, but as a person worthy of love and respect. She wanted to build a life based on genuine care and commitment, not on the wreckage of other people's marriages. "I want him to be the man I thought he was when I fell in love with him," Sarah said finally, "but I'm not sure that man exists anymore." The three of them finished closing the restaurant in comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts about love and responsibility and the ways that people change when success and money enter their lives. As they prepared to leave through the staff entrance, Maria pulled Sarah aside. "Whatever you decide about him," Maria said, "remember that you don't owe him anything. You don't owe him forgiveness, you don't owe him a relationship, you don't even owe him access to the baby if he's going to be unreliable or harmful. You've proven you can do this alone. Don't let him back into your life unless he's going to make it better, not just more complicated." Sarah hugged the older woman, grateful for the maternal wisdom she had been missing since her own family had turned their backs on her. "Thank you for everything. For taking care of me, for believing in me, for giving me a family when mine gave up on me. Families aren't just about blood, Mija. They're about who shows up when you need them. And we'll keep showing up, no matter what happens with him." The bus ride home was quieter than usual. The late-night passengers, mostly service workers and shift employees, heading home after long days. Sarah watched the city pass by through rain-streaked windows, thinking about the conversation she would have with Marcus tomorrow evening, about the choices she would have to make, about the future she was trying to build for herself and her child. Her studio apartment felt smaller than usual when she finally got home, cramped and inadequate in ways that had become more obvious as her pregnancy progressed, but it was hers, earned through her own work, maintained through her own determination. She had learned to take pride in that independence, even when it felt overwhelming. Sarah changed into comfortable clothes and made herself a cup of herbal tea, settling onto her futon with one of the pregnancy books she had checked out from the library. She was trying to learn everything she could about labor, delivery, and newborn care, preparing herself for challenges she had never imagined she would face alone. The baby kicked hard enough to make her gasp, and Sarah placed both hands on her belly, marveling as always at the miracle of life growing inside her. This child was hers, created from her body, sustained by her blood, protected by her determination to give them the best life possible, despite impossible circumstances. "What do you think, little one?" she whispered to her belly. "Should we let your daddy try to be part of our lives? Or are we better off on our own?" The baby responded with a series of gentle movements that felt almost like an answer, though Sarah couldn't interpret what that answer might be. She had been making decisions for both of them for months. What to eat, how much to work, which medical care they could afford, how to prepare for a future that felt uncertain and frightening and full of possibility, all at the same time. Tomorrow she would have to make perhaps the most important decision yet. Whether to trust Marcus when he said he wanted to be involved, whether to believe that he had changed, whether to risk the independence she had fought so hard to achieve for the chance that her child might have a father who loved them. It was a decision that would shape not just her future, but her child's future. And the weight of that responsibility felt heavier than her pregnancy, more daunting than single motherhood, more challenging than anything she had faced in her 26 years. But as Sarah drifted off to sleep that night, she realized that she was no longer the uncertain young woman who had been abandoned 8 months ago. She had become someone stronger, someone who could make difficult decisions and live with the consequences. Someone who could protect what mattered most, even when everything else fell apart. The next evening, Marcus called exactly at 7 o'clock. Sarah had spent the day preparing for the conversation, thinking through what she wanted to say, what questions she needed answered, what boundaries she needed to establish. "Hello, Sarah." His voice was different than it had been at the restaurant, quieter, more uncertain, less polished. "Hello, Marcus." Thank you for agreeing to talk to me. I know you don't owe me anything, and I'm grateful that you're willing to give me a chance to try to do better." Sarah settled into her futon, her hand resting on her belly, where the baby was unusually quiet, as if listening to their father's voice. "What happened after you left the restaurant last night?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "Victoria and I had a very honest conversation about our marriage, our expectations, and what kind of people we really are. And she made it clear that she married me for my money and social status, not for love. She also made it clear that she has no interest in being associated with a man who has children with someone she considers beneath her social or class." Sarah felt a familiar stab of pain at the casual cruelty of Victoria's attitude, but also a strange sense of relief. At least the truth was finally out in the open. "What does that mean for you?" Sarah asked. "It means I have some very serious decisions to make about what kind of life I want to live and what kind of man I want to be." Sarah had heard Marcus make promises before, had listened to him talk about the person he wanted to become while making choices that contradicted every word. She had learned to judge him by his actions rather than his intentions. "What kind of decisions?" she asked carefully. Marcus took a deep breath. "The decision about whether to stay married to someone who sees our child as a threat to her lifestyle, or whether to prioritize being a father over maintaining my social status." "Our child," Sarah repeated. "So you're acknowledging paternity?" "Yes. I want a DNA test when the baby is born, not because I doubt you, but because I want legal documentation for custody and support arrangements. I want to do this right, Sarah. I want to be a real father, not just a check-writing stranger." Sarah felt her heart skip a beat. This was what she had wanted to hear for months. But now that the words were actually being spoken, she found herself scared of believing them. "What does being a real father mean to you?" she asked. "It means being involved in decisions about the baby's care, education, upbringing. It means sharing custody when the child is old enough. It means being present for important moments, first steps, first words, school plays, birthday parties. It means being someone the baby can count on, always." The vision he was painting was everything Sarah had dreamed of during the long, lonely months of her pregnancy. But it was also complicated by the reality of their situation, by the hurt that had accumulated between them, by the practical challenges of co-parenting with someone who had already proven unreliable. "That sounds wonderful in theory," Sarah said carefully. "But what about your wife? What about your business? What about all the reasons you had for walking away in the first place?" Marcus was quiet for so long that Sarah wondered if the call had been disconnected. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "I've been thinking about that all day, about what I was so afraid of losing, and what I actually lost by walking away from you. And I realized that everything I was trying to protect, my reputation, my social status, my marriage to Victoria, none of it means anything if I can't look at myself in the mirror. None of it matters if I become the kind of man who abandons his children." Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes, not from sadness, but from the cautious hope that was beginning to bloom in her chest, despite her best efforts to protect herself. "What are you saying, Marcus?" "I'm saying that I'm going to leave Victoria. I'm saying that I want to be part of our child's life if you'll let me. I'm saying that I want to support you through the rest of your pregnancy and help you prepare for everything that's coming." The words hung in the air between them, full of possibility and danger and the weight of choices that couldn't be undone. "This isn't about getting back together," Sarah said firmly. "I need you to understand that. Too much has happened. Too much trust has been broken. I can't go back to who we were." "I know," Marcus said quietly. "I'm not asking you to forgive me or take me back or pretend that the last 8 months didn't happen. I'm asking for the chance to be a good father and a reliable co-parent. I'm asking for the opportunity to prove that I can do better." Sarah thought about Maria's advice, about not letting Marcus back into her life unless he was going to make it better rather than more complicated. She thought about her child, who deserved to have a father who loved them and supported them. She thought about herself, who deserved to have a partner in raising their child, even if that partnership couldn't include romantic love. "If we do this," Sarah said slowly, "we do it with clear boundaries and realistic expectations. You don't get to disappear again when things get difficult. You don't get to prioritize other people's comfort over our child's needs. You don't get to make promises I can't keep." "I understand. Do you? Because the man I fell in love with made a lot of promises about the future we were going to build together. And when those promises became inconvenient, you walked away without looking back." The pain in Sarah's voice was unmistakable, and Marcus felt it like a physical blow. He had spent months telling himself that the breakup had been mutual, that they had simply grown apart, that he had done what was best for both of them. But hearing Sarah's perspective, understanding the impact of his abandonment, forced him to confront the truth about his own selfishness. "You're right," he said. "I made promises I didn't keep. I told you I loved you, and then I acted like love was conditional on convenience. I let you down in the worst possible way, at the worst possible time. Yes, you did. And I understand if you can't trust me again. I understand if you think it's safer to do this alone rather than risk being disappointed again." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, feeling the baby's gentle movements as if they were weighing in on the conversation. Finally, she spoke. "I don't want to do this alone, Marcus. I've been alone for 8 months, and it's been the hardest thing I've ever done. I want our child to have a father who loves them and shows up for them and puts their needs first when it matters. That's what I want too. But I also can't afford to be wrong about this. I can't afford to let you into our lives and then have you decide that fatherhood is too complicated or too demanding or too damaging to your image." Marcus thought about everything he would be giving up: his marriage, his social status, the comfortable life he had built on careful deceptions and strategic relationships. Then he thought about his child, growing up without knowing their father, wondering why they weren't worth fighting for. "What can I do to prove that I'm serious about this?" he asked. Sarah had been thinking about that question all day. "Start by leaving Victoria. Not because I'm asking you to, but because staying married to someone who sees our child as a threat isn't compatible with being a good father. I've already spoken to a lawyer about divorce proceedings. Start by finding your own place to live, somewhere appropriate for a child to visit, somewhere that says you're building a life that includes being a father. I'm looking at apartments tomorrow. Start by coming to my next doctor's appointment. It's next Wednesday at 2 o'clock. If you want to be involved in decisions about the baby's care, you need to understand what that care actually involves." Marcus felt a flutter of something that might have been excitement. "You want me to come to a doctor's appointment? I want you to start acting like an expectant father instead of just someone who's dealing with the consequences of an inconvenient pregnancy." The distinction was important, and Marcus understood it immediately. Sarah wasn't asking him to rescue her or solve her problems. She was asking him to step up and be a partner in preparing for their child's arrival. "I'll be there," he said. "What else?" "Start by helping me financially, not out of guilt, but because raising a child costs money and you have more resources than I do. I need to be able to take maternity leave without worrying about rent. Consider it done. I can transfer money tomorrow and we can set up a more formal support arrangement once the baby is born." Sarah felt some of the crushing financial pressure she had been carrying begin to ease. The ability to take proper maternity leave, to focus on recovery and bonding with her baby, instead of worrying about paying bills, was a gift beyond measure. And Marcus, yes? Start by understanding that our child is going to grow up in two different worlds. Your world of wealth and privilege, and my world of hard work and careful budgeting. They need to understand both, to be comfortable in both, to respect people regardless of their economic status. Marcus thought about Victoria's casual cruelty towards service staff, about his own tendency to measure people's worth by their bank account balances, about the kind of values he wanted to pass on to his child. You're right. I've spent too many years thinking that money determines worth. I don't want our child to grow up believing that. They talked for another hour, working through practical details and emotional boundaries, establishing the framework for a co-parenting relationship that neither of them had ever imagined they would need. It wasn't romantic, it wasn't passionate, but it was real in a way that Marcus's marriage to Victoria had never been. When they finally hung up, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in months: hope. Not hope for a romantic reconciliation, not hope for the fairy tale ending she had once imagined, but hope that her child would have two parents who loved them and worked together to give them the best possible life. The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind of changes. Marcus filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences and requesting a quick settlement. Victoria, furious at being publicly abandoned for a pregnant ex-girlfriend, hired the most aggressive divorce lawyer she could find and threatened to take half of everything Marcus owned. "Let her," Marcus told his own lawyer. "I'm more interested in starting over than in protecting assets I probably don't deserve anyway." The divorce proceedings became a media spectacle, with society reporters documenting every filing, every court appearance, every public statement. Victoria gave interviews portraying herself as the victim of Marcus's midlife crisis, painting Sarah as a calculating gold digger who had seduced a successful businessman into abandoning his marriage. Sarah, meanwhile, tried to ignore the media attention and focus on preparing for the baby's arrival. She had moved to a larger apartment with Marcus's financial help, not luxurious, but safe and comfortable, with space for a nursery and room for Marcus to visit when he had custody. True to his word, Marcus attended every doctor's appointment, asking questions about Sarah's health and the baby's development, learning about labor and delivery and newborn care. He was awkward at first, clearly out of his element in the world of prenatal vitamins and birthing classes, but his dedication was unmistakable. "The baby's heart rate looks perfect," Dr. Martinez announced during their 36-week appointment, moving the ultrasound wand across Sarah's belly. "And based on the position, I'd say you're going to have this little one right on schedule." Marcus stared at the grainy image on the screen, still amazed by the miracle of seeing his child moving and growing inside Sarah's body. Is that a baby's face?" "That's your daughter," Dr. Martinez said with a smile. "She's definitely camera ready." "Daughter?" Sarah gasped. They had chosen not to learn the baby's sex during earlier appointments, wanting some element of surprise. "We're having a girl?" Marcus felt tears prick at his eyes as he stared at the ultrasound image of his daughter. A little girl who would depend on him to protect her, to support her, to show her what it meant to be loved unconditionally by her father. "A daughter," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. After the appointment, they sat in Marcus's car in the hospital parking lot, both processing the news that their abstract baby was now a very specific little girl who would arrive within the month. "Have you thought about names?" Marcus asked. Sarah smiled. "I have a few ideas. What about you?" "I keep thinking about Hope. Hope Wellington Chen or Chen Wellington, however we decide to handle the hyphenation." Sarah looked at him with surprise. "Hope? Why Hope?" Marcus thought about the night at the restaurant, about the moment when everything had changed, about the second chance he had been given to become the man his daughter deserved. because that's what she represents to me. Hope for redemption. Hope for becoming better than I've been. Hope for building something real and meaningful instead of just accumulating wealth and status. Sarah felt tears run down her cheeks. Hope Chen Wellington. I love it. 3 weeks later, Sarah went into labor at 2 in the morning. She called Marcus, who arrived at the hospital still in pajamas, more nervous and excited than she had ever seen him. He stayed by her side through 14 hours of labor, holding her hand through contractions, encouraging her when she wanted to give up, marveling at her strength and determination. Hope Chen Wellington was born at 4:23 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon, weighing 6 pounds, 12 ounces, with a full head of dark hair and her father's brown eyes. She was perfect and healthy and absolutely beautiful, and when the doctor placed her in Sarah's arms, both parents cried with relief and joy and overwhelming love. "She's so small," Marcus whispered, afraid to touch her delicate fingers. "She's perfect," Sarah said, exhausted but radiant with happiness. Marcus looked at his daughter, this tiny person who had already changed his life completely, and made a silent promise. He would be the father she deserved. He would put her needs first, always. He would show her every day that she was loved and valued and important. He would never let her doubt her worth the way he had let Sarah doubt hers. The next few months were a learning curve for everyone. Marcus took paternity leave from his business, spending his days at Sarah's apartment, learning to change diapers and prepare bottles, and interpret Hope's different cries. He was clumsy at first, clearly more comfortable in boardrooms than nurseries, but his determination to be a hands-on father was obvious. Sarah watched him transform from the distant, calculating businessman he had become into someone gentler and more present. Fatherhood suited him in ways that success never had, bringing out qualities she had forgotten he possessed: patience, humor, the ability to find wonder in simple moments. They weren't a romantic couple, but they were effective partners in parenting. They made decisions together about Hope's care, shared night feedings and doctor's appointments, and gradually built the kind of trust that comes from showing up consistently for someone who depends on you completely. "She has your stubborn streak," Marcus said one evening, trying to convince Hope to take her bottle while Sarah rested. "She has your determination," Sarah replied, watching him persist despite Hope's protests. "She knows what she wants, and she's not giving up until she gets it." Marcus finally succeeded in getting Hope to eat, and she settled into his arms with the kind of complete trust that babies gave to people who made them feel safe. He looked down at his daughter, still amazed by the miracle of her existence, still grateful for the second chance she had given him to become better than he had been. "I love you, little Hope," he whispered. "I love you more than I've ever loved anything in my life." Sarah watched them together and felt her heart swell with emotions she couldn't entirely name. This wasn't the life she had planned, wasn't the fairy tale ending she had once imagined. But it was good, better than good. It was real and honest, and built on the foundation of shared love for their daughter. 2 years later, Marcus and Sarah attended Hope's second birthday party together, along with Maria and Carlos from the restaurant, some of Sarah's new friends from her marketing job, and Marcus's sister, who had been initially scandalized by the divorce, but had fallen completely in love with her niece. Hope toddled around the apartment that was now spacious and comfortable thanks to Marcus's support, babbling in the mix of English and Spanish she had picked up from her extended family at Le Bernardin. She was fearless and curious and determined, with her father's business acumen already showing in the way she negotiated for extra cookies, and her mother's grace evident in how she charmed every adult in the room. "She's incredible," said Jennifer, Marcus's sister, watching Hope stack blocks with impressive focus. "I can't believe how much she's grown." "She gets bigger every day," Sarah said, settling onto the couch with the exhaustion that came from chasing a toddler. Sometimes I can't believe she's the same tiny baby we brought home from the hospital." Marcus joined them, having successfully redirected Hope from her attempt to climb the bookshelf. "She's definitely inherited the family determination and the complete inability to accept no as an answer," Sarah laughed. "I wonder where she gets that from." "Probably from both of us," Marcus admitted. "She's got your intelligence and my stubbornness. The world better be ready for Hope Chen Wellington." As the party wound down and guests began to leave, Sarah and Marcus worked together to clean up the apartment while Hope napped in her crib. They moved around each other with the practiced efficiency of people who had learned to be a team, who had built something functional and positive out of what had once seemed like an impossible situation. "I've been thinking," Marcus said as they put away leftover cake and gathered discarded wrapping paper. "About what?" "About how different this is from what I thought my life would look like 2 years ago." Sarah paused in her cleaning. "Better or worse?" Marcus thought about his old life, the penthouse apartment, the society parties, the marriage built on mutual benefit rather than mutual affection. Then he looked around Sarah's apartment with its family photos and children's toys and evidence of a life built on love rather than status. "Better," he said without hesitation. "So much better that I can't believe I almost missed it." Sarah smiled. "I can't believe you almost missed it either." "I'm sorry," Marcus said suddenly. "I know I've said it before, but I need you to know that I'm sorry for all of it, for walking away, for letting you go through pregnancy alone, for being the kind of man who could abandon his responsibilities because they weren't convenient." Sarah looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not the polished businessman who had broken her heart, but the devoted father who read bedtime stories every night, who never missed a doctor's appointment, who had restructured his entire life around being present for his daughter. "I know you are," she said, "and I've forgiven you, not because you deserve it, but because holding on to anger was hurting me more than it was hurting you." "Do you think," Marcus started, then stopped, seeming to reconsider his words. "Do I think what? Do you think we'll ever be able to be more than co-parents? Do you think there's any chance that we could try again?" Sarah had been expecting this question for months, had seen it in the way Marcus looked at her sometimes, had felt it in the moments when their old chemistry flickered to life, despite everything that had happened between them. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I love the father you've become, and I respect the man you're trying to be. But I also remember what it felt like to be abandoned by you when I needed you most." Marcus nodded, understanding the weight of what he had done and the difficulty of earning back trust that had been so completely broken. "I'm not asking for an answer now," he said. "I'm not asking for anything except the chance to keep proving that I've changed, that I can be the kind of man who deserves a second chance." Sarah smiled. "You're already proving that. Every day, with Hope, with me, with the way you've restructured your priorities. Just keep proving it. Keep being the person you are now, not the person you used to be." As if summoned by their conversation, Hope's voice came over the baby monitor, calling for her parents with the imperious tone of a 2-year-old who had napped long enough and was ready for more attention. "Mama, Dada, up!" Sarah and Marcus looked at each other and laughed, the moment of serious conversation broken by the demands of parenthood. "Duty calls," Sarah said. "The most important duty of my life," Marcus agreed. They went to get their daughter together, this little girl who had saved them both from lives that looked successful on the surface but were hollow at the core. Hope had given Marcus the chance to become a man worthy of love and respect. She had given Sarah the strength to demand better treatment and the wisdom to forgive without forgetting. She had given them both the opportunity to build something real and lasting and meaningful. As Hope reached up to be picked up, chattering excitedly about her nap and her dreams and her plans for the rest of the day, Sarah realized that this was what happiness looked like. Not the fairy tale ending she had once imagined, but something better. A life built on truth, on commitment, on the shared responsibility of loving someone more than yourself. And in the warm chaos of their daughter's affection, surrounded by the evidence of a life well lived and a love well earned, Sarah understood that sometimes the most profound transformations come not from getting what you thought you wanted, but from discovering what you actually needed. Hope squealed with delight as both parents reached for her at the same time, and in that moment of pure joy, the past was forgiven, the future was full of possibility, and the present was exactly where they all belonged. The millionaire had learned that true wealth wasn't measured in bank accounts or social status, but in the trust of a child who called him Dada. The struggling server had discovered that dignity and strength were currencies that no one could take away from her, and their daughter would grow up knowing that she was loved completely, that her parents had fought for the privilege of raising her, and that sometimes the most beautiful love stories are the ones that bloom from the ashes of broken dreams and rebuilt lives. In the end, they all got exactly what they needed.